Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you ate well. This is a short, sort of informal panel. We're going to ask questions all around the industry, the uses of zero knowledge, privacy in general. Maybe the time to ask those questions about blockchain, where it is, because a lot of the first uses of zero knowledge are around the blockchain space. So what's happening in that space? And so we start by presenting each of us.
I'm Senatore, I'm a director in technology, co-lead of the EMEA Blockchain Lab and global CTO for Deloitte Blockchain.
Hi, I'm Peter Broadhusrt. I'm one of the co-founders and the head of engineering at Kaleido.
Hello, I'm Daira Hopwood. I work for Electric Coin Company and I do protocol design and research and analysis.
Hello, I'm Tom Walton Pockoc. I'm one of the co-founders at Aztec protocol, which is the privacy and scaling protocol on Ethereum.
Electric Coin Company?
Who develops Zcash.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah. I shouldn't people know that.
No problem. So maybe to start, you can start by describing where you're working or meeting zero knowledge proof techniques, or how do you even what connects you to this room? That's an easy one.
That's an easy one. Yeah. I mean, you've seen this morning one of the presentation actually was quoting our work, which was around the economy audit for the crypto assets there, and we do a lot of that type of work. I mean, John mentioned the EduScript work that we do on blockchain, and both cases were Ethereum type of work. I mean, we are facing a challenge, I would say, but a reality that we are tokenizing assets, we are tokenizing identities, we are tokenizing, credentials in general, and things like that. And our current solution model, given all the standards that are out there, are for data, pseudo-anonymization. Like you've seen the Merkle tree we published for economy. Yes, data is anonymized, but it's, you can infer a lot of information. You can infer how many, customers you have. You can infer the number of transactions. You can infer several things that may not be part of what we call the PII in the GDPR world, but are still something that businesses or individuals don't want to see there, or they don't want to discover. And so we are facing that. We're facing the need for something more, something that can obfuscate everything. Because, I mean, if we go back in security, let's go back in cybersecurity, one of the first things in cybersecurity is data enumeration. Enumeration, your ability of understanding what is behind the scenes. You don't need the real data, the actual data, but if you can infer something that can give you an advantage, that's good for you and bad for the other party. So that's what we are facing at the moment. So zero knowledge proof in the tokenization.
So at Kaleido, we're about providing, I guess, the easy button for enterprise adoption of the sort of blockchain and surrounding technologies. So when you get a set of organizations that want to get together and do their business in a different way, in a slightly more collaborative way, the reality is that privacy is right at the top of their list. The amount of data that large organizations getting together and doing kind of co-opetition for the first time, breaking down some of these walls between the organizations, that the reality is that they're willing to share a tiny amount of data. And you see so many solutions where really all that ends up on the chain is just a hash. And all of these organizations want shared rules that everybody has to abide to. They want shared states such as total conservation of value, or being able to assert that you really did go through a certain state transition, or change of ownership of an asset. And the technologies that are available today are all a compromise. And I'll talk about those technologies actually in the session later this afternoon. Zero knowledge proofs is so exciting because for the first time, it has the promise of being this sort of magic technology that will take away all the barriers. For that reason, we've been talking about zero knowledge proofs for the last year or so. Every time we put it on a slide, it's the thing that everybody wants to talk about. And just now we see the technology clipping over with partnerships like QEDIT and the partnership we have with Quorum for the anonymous thief on the platform, that actually adoption's looking like a reality. It's not happened yet, but it's looking like a reality for the first time. So it's so exciting to be here with such a large group that actually, from lots of different backgrounds, but believe that enough to sort of attend an event like this and do this kind of stuff.
So I guess I'm here because privacy is a human right, and I really care about it. I think that it's under threat from a number of directions, from governments, from corporations, from criminals, from fascists, and people have the right to protect their privacy. Even if you just can restrict to money, for example, you can't have any other kind of privacy if all of your financial transactions are in the clear. So why use zero knowledge proofs as a tool for that? Well, because it's the right abstraction to do lots of things very generally. You're able to express general computational statements over private data. That's a very powerful abstraction, and we've only really begun to scratch the surface of what's possible using that.
So we, as a company, we originally started life as an institutional platform for lending. And the reason we wanted to be on a blockchain at all was because we were dealing with types of private capitals. These were largely syndicated debt.
So you're Thomas from?
Tom from Aztec Protocol. So we were originally a credit platform, and the reason we wanted to build this platform was that large swathes of private capital, order of tens of trillions of dollars, has never had access to clearing technology before. So the ability to, when I want to go and sell a piece of debt to someone else, ensure that the fiat's going to come back and there's no possibility of default. So I know that's obviously a very obvious need we want to use blockchain for, but obviously we didn't have access to privacy at that time. And so we had to address privacy before we could even bring these pieces of private capital, which, by the way, trade at low enough volumes today that you can go onto mainnet, you really can, particularly with the syndicated loan market, because they trade at very, very high notionals, but the ordinal number of transactions is actually quite low. And so we started to look into privacy because of that project that we were working on. We're now fully focused on privacy, and it was amazing how many people even 12 months ago were saying, yes, but who cares about that? Isn't pseudo-anonymity good enough? And I always just slightly looked at the magog, and it took a while to develop a narrative that turned someone's basic intuition that pseudo-anonymity was good enough. I even had one of these conversations with one of our developers at Aztec, who is the most crypto-punk developer you can imagine, and then made the dubious decision to reimburse one of our other colleagues with some DAI about 3 or 4 months ago, who then immediately downloaded his entire financial records on Ethereum. And so I think it's increasingly becoming obvious as we move away from these things being toys to identifying transactions, going and spending money using these systems. We're going to need privacy as a basic technology.
Question there. So I'm not sure if...
Use that one. Take it up.
I'll do that. If we're only now starting to solve privacy, what were we doing before? So is there all this world of data out there that's now notarized and up for grabs that's not private? How did enterprise deployment companies deal with this situation? What's there when before there's such a solution?
I mean, my previous role in Deloitte was in nearly for big data. And I was the first in Deloitte globally to release a large project on Hadoop Cloudera Rupa at the time, talking about 2012. Like nobody knew what I was talking about. And at the same time, somebody else, also governments, were using the same type of technology, Facebook, etc., etc. So I think, you know, so in my view, what happened is that we simply saw in data real value to improve people's life. And for years we have been, you know, gathering this massive amount of data with several technologies which have served us well. And now probably the thing has gone out of hand, as it was mentioned a minute ago. And now we are looking at things, you know, we are looking at how to protect privacy. So technology so far has been gathering a lot of data because we couldn't do that before. Let's not forget that 15 years ago, 10 years, 12 years ago was difficult to gather multi-stream of data, unstructured, structured, and go about querying it. It was the easiest thing in the world to do. Databases weren't really that powerful. Then we got to the second step, you know, the Satoshi white paper, anonymization, pseudo, probably, which is still not good enough, but we made a step towards that, and now we're discussing zero knowledge proof. But that's what we've been doing. That's been our journey so far. Please go ahead.
So basically, we're all screwed because all of this data from Facebook and Google and Microsoft and whatever is all accessible to fascist governments. And eventually they're going to use it against us. I don't know what to do about that apart from get rid of the fascist governments.
Quite a statement.
So I guess
try to react to that before you...
I guess what I was going to say was I guess I'm in the blockchain pragmatist camp. There's two sides that are very polarized. You see public adoption of blockchain, complete end user to end user decentralization that has a fantastic movement and real positive value that can be gained. And you see the current status quo of large organizations working with regulators on regulated data, hopefully a good number of them well-meaning organisations doing the right thing by our data in certain cases, maybe some not. And I guess we need to move the bar from both directions. We aren't going to change overnight the way that large organisations affect the core systems of enterprise and trade and transactions immediately. And we can help them change. And I think the fantastic kind of catalyzing agent of blockchain and also the ecosystem economy that's going to cause a problem for them otherwise, is changing the way that these organizations think about collaboration. And it's opening up the doors. But the reality is that they don't want to open up in a way that either compromises the control they already place on our data and on their own private competitor data, and they've still got to comply to the regulators, yet they still want to trade a little bit like these, completely disruptive, completely different systems. They want a little bit of that, but I guess they're coming at it from a lot of inertia and momentum that's served us in some positive ways in the past.
So good intentions are not enough because all of this data exists now unencrypted on insecure servers, and it's not that any individual employee of these corporations is corrupt and wants to violate people's privacy. A few of them do, and we've seen examples of that of insiders at Google and whatever abusing people's data. But that's not the main problem. The main problem is that this data is stored on insecure systems, and we can't get rid of it. And we can only mitigate the problem. I don't know how to solve it.
There's maybe an interesting perspective here. This technology is also being used, for example, in China, by the actual Chinese government between the different agencies of the Chinese government. because they would also like to collaborate, but don't want to share the data between them. They have lots of data, but approach the technical problem of collaborating between those agencies on this data using those same techniques that we're using to fight privacy, overreach, and the approach that's let's say less more focused on the tech itself is what can different actors take out of the technology, each for their own interests, and how they use it as a new tool to align or to collaborate in a way that doesn't impose one side or another. And some people actually use it even if the entire background of the use is would be regarded as a privacy overreach altogether.
In some constituencies, some governments, like even sharing data across government agencies, it's not that trivial. There's a lot of regulation around that, to be honest. Now, the Chinese case is probably has a different angle to that, but what you just said, applying this technology across government to share information for a better collaboration between agencies is quite interesting, because it's not that trivial right now to just from a healthcare department to send data to the tax revenue or to the finance department about yourself. It's not, doesn't happen like that. There's a lot of regulation around that. So yeah, no, I'm with you there. I'm with you.
So maybe on a little bit on the credit scoring part. So what other solutions are there for people to be to receive the same benefits if you're not keeping the privacy of your data? How do are we going to accept having our score stem from just a centralized collection of all of our data?
Yes, I mean, I'm hoping that this technology will slightly help us move away from credit scoring to some extent. So I think if you look at, take a sort of a tier 1 DeFi system like MakerDAO. Actually, I was just speaking to someone from Centrifuge about this. And one thing you might want to do here is, let's suppose you have a piece of credit, and most pieces of credit are not very liquid. They don't have a good price on them that says this is how risky this data is. So one way that you might be able to, for example, transmit information on how risky the credit is by asking people to put up a certain amount of cash stake against a piece of credit and say, look, the world doesn't need to necessarily inspect this piece of credit, but I'm prepared to, on a, let's say, $100 million loan, I'm prepared to put $10 million of cash.
You want to augure it?
Sorry?
You want to augure it?
You're almost doing that. I mean, this, by the way, exists in the real world today. In the shadow banking industry, there are two types of zero-knowledge proof that already sort of exist. One is you have kind of debt funds, where most of their return is a leveraged exposure to the debt, right? So they're not broadcasting information on the debt. Instead, they're saying, well, most of our economic return is going to come out if all of the debt survives. Now, this shadow banking industry is horrible in many ways, but there's one good thing that it does. It helps preserve some privacy for the company. There's another mechanism that we've always had as well, which is a sort of zero-knowledge proof, not a mathematical one, which has been covenants in debt. So we've had, for example, if a company feels very sure that its financial returns are going to be good and it's going to hit lots of metrics, what it does is it says, look, I don't want to give you too much information about my company, or this could work for an individual as well. So what I'm going to say is, I've taken out, let's say, $100 million of debt, and I've got supporting income of $20 million. I am so confident that the company is in good health that instead of giving you all of the details on the company or all of my private details, instead I'm going to set the covenant level very close to 5 times. So 100 million is the debt, divided by 20 million is the supporting income. And the interesting thing about that is that's a way of saying, this is me proving to you, because if I'm slightly wrong about that, and my income actually falls a bit, I'm going to default straight away. So it's a way of broadcasting information, saying this is a proof of certainty. in the
So
on
in
behalf
a
of
way
my
it's-
company.
It's
And
a
you can do that with
super-
ZKProofs.
That's the sort of top limit of the super inefficient way of doing it, right?
But precisely because, well, I mean, for a start, there are only so many lenders that will act like this, and it requires quite a lot of sophistication. But you could do interesting things like serving range proofs instead to say, look, I'm going to continue to serve you proofs up to some maximum of, let's say, 6 times leverage. That I'm within the allowable range of indebtedness until at some point someone says, look, I'm sorry, this debt's become too risky and we're going to have to enforce. But that's a kind of that's where a cryptographic method can very easily replace a zero knowledge sort of attestation that we've already historically had in the past, but allow the universe of potential lenders to become much wider than just 1 or 2 shadow banks and large commercial banks.
Interesting.
So I think as a community we have to be very careful not to just sprinkle zero knowledge pixie dust on systems that are fundamentally unfair and unjust. We need, in some cases the better approach may be to simply sort of deny our participation in those systems because take credit scoring, for example. I don't think that just sprinkling a bit of zero knowledge onto credit scoring is going to fix the fundamental problems and injustices and discrimination that arises from that system.
So if we're digging that a little bit, isn't it making it more explicit what that injustice is? So to give an example, if we have an insurance system that now has access to every single digital detail about a person and can give a super exact score of what this person's health is or could be, that person is no longer hidden in the mean of a pool of people. We're now having, the insurance can have in zero knowledge, but access to the bottom line risk of that particular person pulled out of the pool. So we cannot no longer hide ourselves in the masses and smear the risk between different people, but then it becomes the responsibility of society in general to say, well, that formula is horrible. You're pinpointing the sick and benefiting the non-sick. As a society, let's explicitly say that we put a factor on that calculation, and we average back those individuals into a pool. So you could have the systems get into as detailed level of knowledge extraction with zero knowledge proof, but still reason about it with ethical concerns, and but just doing it explicitly.
It's a problem of governance. Like who does that? What you just said. As a society, what does it mean? You know what I mean? It's a public network. It's going to be a network. What's the constitution there? How do we go about deciding to change that formula? Yeah, maybe somebody can create a new formula, and if it's going to fork the network or a new series of smart contract or whatever it is, and maybe that could work. But then that requires followership. So it's a change of dynamics into our democratic process and governance of this. So it's not that trivial. But it's an interesting point. Yeah, it can show, it is a transparency engine ultimately, so it can show exactly what bad looks like, whether now it's hidden behind the system of organizations, but what do we do about that then requires thinking.
I think there was a mention about it from Costas from presenting the work on Libra, how to join zero knowledge and differential privacy. So make it possible to prove to hide. Sorry, one.
It's gone.
This is good. That work about hiding or putting back the statistical distribution and proving that statistical distribution still comes from the different data of the individuals. the techniques are not there. Maybe they combine more privacy enhancing techniques, but they're still there to apply. It's just a matter of is there a policy to apply them. But maybe moving on to a little more practical uses of zero knowledge. So what zero knowledge proofs are right now out there running in production, as far as you know?
That's Zcash.
Grot 16. And whatever you can do on Ethereum using BN254, which probably is Grot 16 as well.
What can you do on Ethereum?
So you can do pairing checks, which in principle allows you to do any sort of pairing check based snark.
What does that mean?
Okay.
I mean, unless everybody knows what pairing is.
Yes. Yeah, pairings. How many people in the room know what a cryptographic pairing is? Okay, maybe about 2/3. So basically, it's a form of cryptography where you have more structure than you would have in a Diffie-Hellman-based protocol. So for Diffie-Hellman, you basically just rely on the fact that you have a group. You can do addition, scalar multiplication, and there are two different ways to get to the same key. In pairings, you have another operation called a pairing, which takes a group element and another group element, and it basically multiplies together the corresponding scalars. And you end up in a third group, which you have to be careful about the security for, because you can use index calculus on it.
It's like the analogy of computing like an addition of the exponent by multiplying two things.
Yeah, you can kind of think of it as like if Diffie-Hellman is a two-dimensional square, then pairings are like a cube. That's yeah.
Oh, that helps me think about it. So, all right. So maybe from another angle, today's crypto and today's zero knowledge proof. You mentioned Grot 16. So Grot 16 is because it was published in 2016.
Yes, and it's Grot, by the way, or Grot.
Grot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Grot.
So what was wrong about Grot 15, 14? Why do we still need to wait for Grot 18? Why are we standardizing now?
So the paper that proposed this system basically had a kind of efficiency argument that in some sense this is the optimal number of group elements that you can use, that you can end up with in the proof. So that's basically why we use it.
As possible.
There are some caveats to that, but basically, yeah, and you end up with very small proofs. So you end up concretely with 192 byte proofs for the BLS12 381 curve, which is the one used in Zcash sapling.
Do we need anything else now?
Yes, because Grot 16 requires a trusted setup for each statement that you want to prove, and that is a showstopper for many protocols. You can't use that for smart contracts. It's completely impractical to do a setup of the same complexity and sort of investment from the community as sapling for every smart contract.
A word maybe about the trusted setup. There's actually a trusted setup being done right now, right?
For Aztec, yeah.
For Aztec.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, of course, thank you. So yes, we originally devised the Aztec trusted setup to be able to build proofs using things called von Ebuyen signatures, which allows us to essentially do. And there have been a couple that have come out, one called Marlin, one called Plonk, which are much more efficient, and they allow one trusted setup, which is points of form g to the x to the I principally, and these go all the way up to, in our particular case, 100 million. Some are doing even larger ranges than that. And so we've made sure that the setup that we're running right now, and you can watch it by the way, there's a lovely Earth view at ignition.aztecprotocol.com, so you can go and tap on the globe and see where this transcript has already passed in the past 2.5 days, and it'll run for 30 days in all. And that will serve as the trusted setup, not just for our first proof system, but also for universal snarks under Plonk. And that's on the BN254, or people call this thing lots of different names, so BN254 curve, and that will admit Plonk snarks, which really means now arbitrary smart contracts. As Daira was saying, this now means there's one trusted setup. We expect the gas cost to be around about 250,000 gas on Ethereum when we deploy that. That could be a couple of quarters away at least, though.
So the rationale for choosing BN254 was just that it's supported already on Ethereum?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, precisely. I should say, by the way, there's, I believe Zcash involved in this. There's another setup ongoing being run by Protocol Labs. And of course, the Ethereum Foundation is running one as well. But the Protocol Labs one is on BLS 12381, which is the same one as happening.
So I have a question regarding the actual use and adoption of universal trusted setup. Like, it seems like since Sonic, there's been a lot of improvements, including Marlin and Plonk and so on. Are we going to actually use these? Because it seems like this idea of custom gates are still not kind of efficient enough in some cases. What are the trade-offs there that you're looking at for your applications?
So to repeat the question, is any of those trusted setup, what's the lifetime expectancy of this trusted setup? Is it going to be used now for a long time? Is the crypto that it's connected to a long-term solution?
I don't know. The progress is so fast that it could be that Plonk and Marlin are obsoleted within a few months, or it could be that they last the test of time. And I think it's really too early to tell yet. I mean, at some point, if you're designing a concrete protocol, then you just have to go with what's available at the time that you're designing it. So there will be protocols that are based on Marlin or Plonk or whatever the designers think is most efficient at the time.
I guess one thing I'd say is that the networks that we work with, the value that's being captured by large enterprise in blockchain primarily has been, so far, in private permissioned networks. And it's yet to be seen what trusted setup people will use in those private permission networks.
Why do you need trusted setup in a private setting?
It's a good question, this one. It's a great question. I mean, you could get away in a trusted setup. You could get away with a point-to-point protocol. You get protocols that are distributed database, point-to-point. They're out there. Probably the point there is to say where, as the example of the government that I gave you before, they don't want to share that information anyway. Hence, you need a trusted setup. So
there was an example that Alexei from ING talked about earlier, where actually trusted setup is almost not a real point because you're already putting trust. So that was the example of the notaries, zero knowledge notaries in Cornell.
Yeah. That's what I was referring with point to point.
Point to point. Okay. So that's an example where actually the trust in those notaries is already much wider than the trust you would put in a setup.
So even in those contexts, you don't actually want there to be that toxic waste because you don't want the OPSEC requirement of having to have a really secure system to do the setup on. When we were doing the first setup for Zcash Sprout, we were really concerned about this issue because there were only 6 participants, and we spent a lot of effort in sort of...
Weren't they 10x paranoid though?
Because it was
regular participants.
Because it was the first major deployment of a trusted setup, we were especially paranoid, and we had to kind of convince people that this was actually a safe thing to do. against a quite justified degree of skepticism. But it is very difficult to secure computers. We basically do not have secure computers. If you look at the Meltdown and Spectre attacks, which were after that setup, but they basically have proved that our computers are insecure, and it will take quite a few years to fix that, or if we even can fix it.
So another thing you said, I mean, Peter a minute ago said we're seeing most of enterprises at the moment exploiting the value of permissioned ledgers, right? And you stated, well, at that stage, why would you need a trusted setup, etc. It is true. In Deloitte as well, we see the same. Although the Deloitte strategy, you all know, is being multi-platform. Hence a combination of hybrid deployments in public cloud with VeChain or Ethereum or even Bitcoin, and permissioned, private public blockchain. Apologies, and permissioned blockchain. We have done several consortium, etc. One thing though that we always say as well is that those permissioned consortium blockchain at some point will have to talk to other chains. They will have to talk to public chains. They will have to talk to other consortium chains. They are going to be interconnected. No matter what you think, okay? No matter what is the protocol that you prefer, no matter what is your idea, that's happening. It's already happening. So you got all these networks popping up everywhere.
So you're
and
talking...
these networks are going to have to talk, even if it's permissioned between us. Let's say Deloitte, QEDIT, we have our own ledger to do our stuff, and another organization. This is another consortium out there that is doing stuff, and we are going to need to exchange assets there.
So are you suggesting that there are consortia out there that are already in production?
Of course.
Oh, okay, so tell us more about that.
The P3I consortium is in production. And there are many others. I think Marco Polo, WeTrade, all these guys are out there. There are consortiums that are in production, and at some point these guys will have to talk to each other. They have to talk to. They announce it. I mean, or some of them are very close to it, but
they're all on the same stack, right? This is Cortex.
No, not all of them.
No?
I think they're hybrid. They have different stacks. And there's also, things like supply chain and the MVGL, like my story, that is public supply chain that tags, food and other things. These have to be interconnected, and you see the Polkadot and protocols and other protocols where there's that thinking of saying, okay, let's put an overarching protocol across them, and then you go back to square one, where is the trusted setup. So it is true, Peter is right. Most of the value at the moment we are seeing is in the permission. However, I believe, these networks are going to have to talk within each other. There is other organizations that believe differently. They are fully focused on public chain because they see the value is only there, the real changing value is only there.
You're talking about some of your colleagues that are doing general?
In general, or even some Deloitte colleagues believe that the value is only there. We take a more pragmatic approach that, yeah, you're right, there's a lot of value in there, but that's not the way things are happening. So we won't get there by enforcing everyone into one protocol, but we will get there by seeing all the protocols appearing and then connecting them. That's the way I'm seeing things. So there's, even in permissioned, to go back to your question, there's going to be a need for trusted setup.
I think the writing is on the wall that we are going to move to trustless proof systems. If only because the performance gap between trustless and I prefer to say public coin versus private coin because it's more technically precise. So that's the actual property of the proof system rather than the protocol. So the performance gap between public and private coin proof systems is going to narrow probably, if only because most of the academic focus is going to be on improving the trustless systems.
Thank you. So we're opening up to questions from you guys. Do you have questions to our panelists? We'll pass the microphone. Antoine, you have a question? No.
Any questions, anyone?
Can I ask a question to you?
Yeah.
Oh, you can
Question
ask.
in the back.
Ask.
Then Kostas, think of a question also. Oh, it's actually him.
Hey, so I'm also considering the practicality of having a broader use of zero-knowledge proofs in the sense that we have a common place to speak about the parameters of the curves, the standardization effort. How does this fit with all of this work that is happening already, but we don't have a standardized, I don't know, method yet? I mean, even for which curve we're using, there are so many different processes that I'm hearing even here today, BLS 12381 or PN 254 or something else. We don't know what to use in the industry. So we have to find this solution first before we broadly accept everything or try to use it and feel confident to have the checkbox checked by our security guys.
So I would say it's a little bit of both. You never get standardization without there being enough adoption, and the early charge will help to drive the adoption. It takes organizations like QEDIT and others that are focused on adoption and enterprise adoption, focused on standardization and enterprise adoption, to help the confidence to be there in an initial group to say, we understand that this curve or this approach or this way of validating a piece of smart contract logic is going to work for us, and they get there through into production with that. That's going to help set the confidence for what does get standardized. Ecosystems are as important as writing down a standard on paper. And ecosystems in history have usually formed around success, around proof points, around real value. So I think it's exciting to be at a stage in the technology where it's just about understandable enough that enterprises can look at it and say, this looks like it's real, but it's still going to take experts on each project at the moment to actually turn it into something that's going to work for someone, because people like me can't choose the right gadget. We just can't, because we don't have the depth of knowledge to be able to understand it at the mass level to say this is right or this is wrong. And fundamentally, no individual group has that at the moment. It takes a group like being formed, we saw on the screen, that's going to actually be able to vet those.
And
What's the lifetime of any project that is built before the RFC actually gets standardized?
all right, so if you're building a project today and you need to make a sort of bet on the curve and a bet on the crypto, then yes, it sounds like difficult times to be betting, because there's movement and there's a beginning of convergence, but there's no yet clear standard being adopted. You're right, but at least the very least you can do is be part of that discussion. Make sure that you're aware of the different contenders and the process that's going on to focus on those that will be standardized first, and also make sure that you understand what parameters in those projects you care about. Because if standardization says post-quantum is not of interest at this stage, and these are the first ones that are being standardized, and for your particular use case you need 50 years ahead of visibility, then you should be aware that you might still need to bet on your own curves. So be part of the understand what the process is for standardization to happen. Be part of the conversation if you have a stake at the crypto that's there. The other comment is we're lucky that we're now talking about different schemes that seem to be good enough, and we're looking at how to make them better, more efficient, etc. The debate is really, are we able to detect good enough schemes to start slowing down the pace and standardize? That's the debate. And if the rest, the rest of the debate is this feature or that feature that you could have that could be better, you can already start betting.
So this is not really a new problem, right? The situation where you have an early draft of a protocol and you want to decide whether to deploy it yet, and that happens for network protocols as well. It happens more often in cryptography, and to some extent it's more serious in cryptography because you may have encrypted data or existing proofs that you still need to be able to support and interpret after the standardization has moved on. But it's a tractable problem. I mean, we know how to version protocols. We know some ways to version protocols badly. TLS is an example of that. So don't do that. But we also know how to version protocols pretty well. You basically do a complete new version of the protocol. You don't do negotiation of individual features. You just sort of adopt a whole new raft of algorithms as a coherent whole, and you have you support the old protocol as well for some period of time, however long you need. So that's a tractable problem, and it's just a matter of engineering.
But we also have an example in the past. Even if the standardization doesn't completely hit, exactly. For example, in Linux, there was at some point this problem of interoperability between distribution, and they started creating this Linux standard something.
Standard base.
Yeah, standard base, which wasn't that much of a success, but the process itself of slowing down the pace and selecting which packages would be binary compatible, just that process made it possible for applications to be able to run on more platforms. It doesn't need to be that standard is a huge success. Just working out what is needed to fix is already achieving a lot.
So I realize the question was much more general, but on the specific question of BN254 versus BLS 12381, I know I may be biased, but use BLS 12381 because there was a very sort of well-supported security justification for moving to that new curve. And the implementation is more efficient. So the technical reason was that there's an attack on the target group of the pairing. There was the Kim-Bavlescu attack, which demonstrated that the security of BN254 is less than it was originally expected to be. So it was originally called BN128 because people thought it had a 128-bit security level, and it doesn't. So we learned not to use that naming convention to refer to curves. You should just refer to them by the bit length, not by how secure you think they are now.
One quick thing on curve selection, why we're not necessarily going to be hopping between curves every 6 months, and that's particularly for the third of the audience who hadn't heard of pairings. It must be remembered that any system of numbers in which we work, and it might be BN254, it might be BLS 12381, or it might be class groups, or it could be anything. But the security of those groups is based on fingers crossed, but it's based on the sort of the social might of armies of cryptographers studying a very small number of structures. And our confidence that these things are secure comes from the fact that, for example, we trust BLS 12381 largely because we haven't heard socially or anecdotally that there have bin disappearances of balances of Zcash or whatever, and the importance of knowing that is extremely high. So there's a sort of standardization there just through the burn-in. Burn-in takes a very long time, and making sure that we're all comfortable that we haven't seen strange disappearances and balances over large periods of time. That itself means that we can't possibly focus on too many of these structures at any given time.
Agreed.
All right. Maybe conclusion points from each of you.
I want to ask you a question.
Oh, go ahead.
So you do the conclusion. I mean, I was discussing that with Peter before. I mean, Peter is from Kaleido. The guys I have plugged the QEDIT solution into the marketplace. As Deloitte, we are now integrating EduScript to provide optional privacy on the issuing of credentials as tokens. We rely a lot on you guys, and you know, and it will be more and more. So we are not gonna probably build capabilities internally to have army of cryptographers to, you know, develop the APIs for us that, you know, come after the standardization and whatever we're gonna come out with. When do you think, I mean, I've seen where we are so far, but when do you think we're going to be at a degree where not standardization but abstraction of those protocols are going to be consumable for everybody else, like we do in normal cryptography nowadays, like you just sign things and they're there for you? Where are we at? What's the timeline there?
So to try to see the time. First of all, that effort would not be a proper QEDIT effort. It would be a ZKProof effort.
That's ZKProof.
So, but it is it would. I think it stands a chance to be built on such efforts such as ZK interface, which is a way to describe R1CS circuits in a format that's slowly being accepted by all those schemes that do R1CS. So front end and back end connecting to this interface. If we put that as a first data point for the slow road to tools that are generally available, well, it took really not such a long time between the time this was proposed to the time the different schemes started integrating into ZK interface. I think the next step is something closer to ZK deploy, just a way to ensure that all of the process steps that are needed to deploy those circuits are there, and you get an experience that's similar to I don't know, npm install or just
NPM.
to. I was being extreme.
Pseudo APP.
Right, but then if you look further down the line on like you said, general protocols that let you express programmability of zero knowledge and integrated already into the protocol, this will probably come from first implementations that need it from a business need and are paying for that development to happen.
So I'd like to inject a notice here. You said that, for example, you can, for conventional cryptography, you can just sign something and expect that to be interoperable. That's not actually how it works. And if you take any academic paper describing a cryptographic scheme, you would not expect that to be interoperable, and it will not be. Even after standardization, you have lots of bugs in implementations. You have corner cases. So, for example, for EDDSA, which is a very widely used signature scheme, it does not actually specify precisely what set of signatures are supposed to verify. So it doesn't specify, for example, whether you should do cofactor authentication, and different implementations will do different things. And in a blockchain context, that really matters because you need it to be deterministic. So when you're designing a higher level protocol, you may very well need to specify a lot more about the low level primitives in order to make sure that they're really deterministic and really interoperable. And we have to do that already, and we will have to do it for ZK primitives as well.
Yeah, so that could be the motor for the way to focus the efforts on a particular standard is that when you see an application all the way to its end, you get more of the requirements on the underlying crypto.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of detail in the Zcash protocol spec is just nailing down these details of existing primitives.
So if you have no more questions, we'll conclude this. Oh, one more question.
Thanks, Daira. It seems that there's I think in general across the community, a fair bit of uncertainty as things keep getting replaced, and we talked today, and Daira says eventually it will be all trustless, and as we stand, things seem to be getting beaten month after month, and this concept is what is the Stark, Snark, Shark, Starks. They'll run out of rhyming words before they run out of actual protocols. Do you not think there should be a possibility, if you're trying to get this to be adopted by enterprises, to perhaps aim towards a more concrete standard that you can present to enterprise and to the real world cases or whatever, rather than moving along the journey with them? Get a concrete that you can present to them, and perhaps the process would be quicker if it's separated into two, rather than
you mean sort of take the lead on a proposal and
yeah, something like that. Rather
Daniel,
than,
what do you think about that?
I was actually gonna say I do have a small word about that. So it is true that indeed, like the field academically is growing so fast, and it's actually like evolving and improving so fast that there's no real point in starting to standardize actual zero-knowledge protocols today. But we can already start standardizing kind of the infrastructure of where those zero-knowledge proofs are going to be based on. So the interoperability, the benchmarking, the different formats, the DSLs, the APIs, all these are kind of very basic stuff that's kind of the first step that you need to take to really get to a standard. I mean, the whole idea of standardizing curves and so on, you can see that more as a kind of a reference documentation or kind of guidelines for best practices. And these can be updated more often, because this is going to be something that's going to be changing as we go with the years. I think Dan Bonnet was just now in a Zero Knowledge podcast, and he was saying that we want to reach the ultimate ZKP scheme, but it's not clear that it exists, right? There's so many different trade-offs to take into account that we're far away, theoretically speaking, from the ultimate scheme that's going to be better than any other. So.
As a Deloitte guy, I wouldn't worry about standardization for adoption from enterprises or government. Like, they've been using networking before the TCP/IP was ever standardized. They've been using it, and several other things in tech before it became mainstream and standardized. It's, as you said before, it's going to be, actually Peter said before, it's going to be adoption and then further standardization, but I wouldn't stop exploring and trying and coming up with new things because that stops adoption. It doesn't work like that. Enterprises are gonna try to use whatever is out there. The more you do, the more research, they're gonna discard whatever it was done before. Enterprises today are more agile as well. They're more, they know how to, well, most of them, not all of them, but they know how to change quickly, how to migrate, etc., etc. So I wouldn't be worried about that. I was talking about with one blockchain guy, so this is outside zero knowledge proof, but I was saying to him, we're multi-platform. I think I've developed solutions, and at least 7 or 8 of them are live on 7-8 different protocols, but I think I've implemented about 12 or something protocols that nobody knows anything about them right now. They don't exist anymore. And he was saying to me, I think the problem of adoption in the blockchain space is because everybody's using different protocols, and that's not the way it works. I wouldn't worry about that at all. It's out there that is good for them. They're going to try it because they want to be innovative. And they're going to change because nowadays, we're in 2019, we are getting better at change. So that's really the thing.
All right. So Antonio, Peter, Daira, Tom, thank you very much for this panel. Thank you for your questions.